Imagine standing on an open plain 300,000 years ago with nothing in your hands. No rifle, no sword made from steel, no factory, no army waiting behind you. There is only the ground beneath your feet, a dangerous animal somewhere in the distance, and another human being watching you from across the landscape. Then you pick up a stone, you notice its sharp edge. You strike it against another stone, and suddenly the world changes. That simple moment may seem almost meaningless today, but it began one of the most important technological stories in human history: the invention of the weapon. The strange thing is that humans probably did not wake up one morning and decide to invent weapons. There was no first warrior standing beside a fire thinking about military technology. The earliest weapons were likely born from something much more basic: survival. Early humans needed to cut meat, break bones, process plants, defend themselves, and sometimes kill animals for food. The same tool that could cut through an animal's hide could also become dangerous in the hands of someone facing an enemy. And that raises a much deeper question. If weapons began as ordinary tools, when did humans first realize that they could deliberately design something to hurt another living creature? The answer takes us much farther into prehistory than most people realize. Long before written records, before cities, kings, or organized armies, humans were already shaping stone into tools. Archaeologists have found stone artifacts dating back more than 2.5 million years, associated with some of our earliest human relatives. These objects were not necessarily weapons in the strict sense. They were multipurpose tools, and that distinction matters. A sharp stone could help process food, but it could also be used for defense. In the earliest stages of human technology, the boundary between tool and weapon was probably almost non-existent. For millions of years, stone remained the foundation of human technology. Early stone tools became increasingly varied and sophisticated, with hand axes, flakes, points, and other forms appearing across different regions and periods. But stone was only part of the story. Wood was probably just as important, perhaps more important, yet it rarely survives in the archaeological record because organic materials decay. This creates a huge problem for anyone trying to reconstruct the first weapons. We can see the stone points that survived thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, but we often cannot see the wooden shafts, clubs, digging sticks, and spears that may have accompanied them. And then archaeologists found something extraordinary. At Schöningen in Germany, several wooden spears dating to roughly 300,000 years ago were discovered preserved in ancient sediments. These were not crude branches randomly picked from the ground. They were carefully shaped wooden weapons, showing planning, craftsmanship, and an understanding of how shape affects performance. Some were designed in ways that made them suitable for throwing, while others may have been used at close range. Whoever made them was not simply carrying a stick. They were engineering a hunting tool. That discovery changes the way we think about ancient humans. A spear requires more than a sharp point. Someone has to select the right piece of wood, remove the bark, shape the shaft, balance it, and understand how it should interact with a target. Even a simple wooden spear contains an idea. Force can be transferred from the human body into an object, allowing the object to reach farther than the arm itself. That idea would eventually become one of the most powerful concepts in the history of warfare. But there was another breakthrough hidden inside the spear: distance. The moment humans began using weapons from farther away, the relationship between hunter and target changed. A dangerous animal no longer had to be reached with bare hands. A person did not necessarily need to stand directly beside an opponent. A weapon could become an extension of the body, allowing humans to project force across space. And once humans discovered that principle, there was almost no limit to how far it could eventually be pushed. Still, the spear did not appear in isolation. Humans were also learning how to control fire, travel across difficult environments, cooperate in groups, and communicate complex information. These abilities mattered because weapons are not simply objects. A weapon becomes powerful when the person holding it knows how to make it, use it, and teach someone else how to use it. A stone tool can be copied. A hunting technique can be remembered. A better design can spread through a population. In this sense, the invention of weapons was also the invention of technological knowledge. One of the most important developments came when humans learned to attach stone points to shafts. This created weapons that could combine the strength and reach of wood with the cutting or penetrating ability of stone. Some of these points may have been used on spears, while others could have served different purposes. But the underlying idea was revolutionary. Separate materials could be combined to create something better than either material alone. This was an early form of composite technology, and humans would repeat the same strategy again and again throughout history. Eventually, another invention pushed the concept of distance even further: the spear thrower. Known in different regions by different names, including the atlatl in the Americas, this simple device acted like an extension of the human arm. It allowed a hunter to throw a dart with greater speed and range than could usually be achieved by hand alone. Suddenly, the weapon was no longer limited by the length and strength of the human arm. Humans had found a way to mechanically amplify their own bodies. Then came the bow. The bow is one of the most elegant weapons humans ever created because it transforms stored energy into motion. When the string is pulled back, energy is stored in the bent bow. Release it and that energy launches an arrow forward. The principle is simple enough for a child to understand, but building an effective bow requires knowledge of wood, tension, shape, balance, and arrow design. It also creates something that earlier weapons could not easily provide, a compact system capable of repeated ranged attacks. The exact origins of the bow are difficult to establish because wood, string, and other organic materials rarely survive. Archaeological evidence for bows and arrows becomes clearer in later prehistoric periods, and some of the earliest known evidence for archery is tens of thousands of years old. By then, humans were no longer simply throwing sharpened objects. They were building systems that could store and release energy with remarkable efficiency. But there is something even more interesting about the rise of projectile weapons. They did not only change hunting, they may also have changed human relationships. If two groups can attack each other from a distance, physical strength becomes only one part of the equation. Skill, coordination, planning, and technology become increasingly important. A smaller individual with a projectile weapon can threaten a much stronger opponent. A group can defend territory without relying entirely on hand-to-hand combat. The weapon changes not only what humans can kill, but what humans can threaten. For thousands of years, however, most weapons remained relatively simple. Stone, bone, wood, and other natural materials dominated human technology. Then humanity discovered something that would transform civilization itself: metal. The first metals humans worked were not necessarily discovered through some deliberate search for weapons. Native metals such as copper could sometimes be found naturally, and people learned to shape them. Later came increasingly sophisticated methods of extracting and working metals from ores. Copper could be hammered and eventually melted, but pure copper was relatively soft. Then humans discovered that combining metals could create stronger materials. Bronze changed everything. Bronze is typically an alloy of copper and tin, although ancient metalworking traditions varied. It could be cast into shapes that were difficult or impossible to produce in stone. Suddenly, humans could create standardized blades, spearheads, axes, helmets, and other objects with forms that could be reproduced. Metalworking was not just a new way to make weapons. It was a new technological system that required mining, transportation, specialized knowledge, fuel, furnaces, molds, and skilled workers, and that created a surprising consequence. Weapons were becoming connected to entire societies. A stone spear could be made by one person with relatively simple materials. A bronze weapon required access to resources and specialized craftsmanship. Tin especially is not found everywhere, meaning long-distance exchange networks became important in many Bronze Age societies. As metalworking developed, control over resources, workshops, trade routes, and skilled labor became increasingly valuable. Weapons were now tied to economics, politics, and social organization. Then another metal began to reshape the ancient world: iron. Iron was not automatically better than bronze. Early ironworking was difficult, and producing useful iron objects required significant knowledge. But iron ores are widespread compared with the sources of tin needed for bronze. And over time, people developed increasingly effective techniques for smelting and working iron. Eventually, iron tools and weapons became widespread across many regions. The sword emerged as one of the most famous symbols of this transformation. But the sword itself was not simply the inevitable next step after the spear. For much of human history, spears remained extremely important because they were effective, relatively simple, and useful both for throwing and close combat. A sword required more material, more specialized craftsmanship, and often more maintenance. Yet the sword had one powerful advantage: it placed a durable cutting weapon directly in the warrior's hand. And this is where weapons began to become something more than survival technology. They became symbols. A sword could represent status, authority, identity, or military power. A decorated weapon could tell everyone who owned it that its owner belonged to a certain social class or group. Weapons could be placed in graves, displayed in ceremonies, passed through generations, and associated with legends. The object that began as a solution to a practical problem could eventually become a symbol of an entire civilization. But humans did not stop at improving individual weapons. They began improving the systems around them. The invention of organized warfare changed the meaning of technology. A weapon is one thing. Hundreds of people using weapons together is something else entirely. Ancient societies developed formations, fortifications, logistics, training systems, and specialized military roles. Spears became part of disciplined infantry formations. Chariots combined transportation, animals, weapons, and train crews. Archers could operate in coordinated groups. Defensive structures forced attackers to develop new tools and tactics. Every improvement created another problem to solve. If attackers had stronger weapons, defenders built stronger walls. If walls became higher, attackers developed siege equipment. If armor improved, weapons evolved to defeat it. If armies became larger, societies needed better systems for supplying them. Warfare became a cycle of invention and response, with technology constantly pushing against technology. But there is a crucial point that is often missed when people tell the story of weapons. Humans did not invent weapons because humans suddenly became evil. Violence existed in many animal species long before humans appeared. Chimpanzees can attack rivals, animals defend territory, and predators kill prey. What made humans different was not the invention of violence itself. It was our extraordinary ability to combine violence with planning, communication, craftsmanship, and cumulative knowledge. That combination is what made human weapons so powerful. A chimpanzee can use a stick. A human can turn a stick into a spear, teach another human how to make it, improve the design, develop a better throwing technique, preserve the knowledge through generations, and eventually build a completely different technology based on the same basic principle. Human technology accumulates. One generation does not have to start from zero, and that may be the biggest twist in the entire story. The most important weapon humans invented was not the spear, the sword, or even the bow. It was the ability to improve an idea and pass that improvement forward. Think about the earliest person who discovered that a stone could be sharpened. Someone else learned from that discovery. Another person found a better stone. Another discovered a better shape. Someone else attached the point to wood. Later, humans developed throwing techniques. Others developed bows. Metalworkers created bronze. Ironworkers created new tools. Engineers developed machines. Eventually, humans learned to harness chemistry, electricity, and nuclear energy. The path from a sharpened stone to a modern weapon is not a straight line. It is a massive network of discoveries built across thousands of generations. Most of the people responsible for those discoveries were never famous. Their names were never recorded. We do not know what they were thinking when they shaped the first spear or fired the first arrow. But their ideas survived because other humans found them useful. And that is why the history of weapons is really the history of human intelligence. Every weapon begins with a question. How can I reach farther? How can I strike harder? How can I protect myself? How can I make this material stronger? How can I defeat that obstacle? Those questions drove humans to experiment with stone, wood, bone, fire, metal, mechanics, chemistry, and eventually technologies that would have seemed impossible to our distant ancestors. The tragedy is that the same intelligence that helped humans survive could also make human violence more destructive. A stone tool could kill an animal. A spear could kill from a distance. A bow could send projectiles farther. Metal weapons could be produced in greater numbers. Industrial technology eventually allowed weapons to be manufactured on a scale ancient societies could never have imagined. Yet the story does not end with destruction. Weapons also forced humans to think about defense, cooperation, law, diplomacy, and the organization of society. Fortifications protected communities. Protective equipment saved lives. The existence of dangerous weapons created pressure for rules governing when and how violence could be used. In many societies, the development of military technology became intertwined with the development of states themselves. So how did humans invent weapons? They did not invent them in a single moment. The first weapons emerged from the same curiosity and practical problem-solving that produced our earliest tools. Humans learned to sharpen stone, shape wood, attach materials together, extend the reach of the body, store energy, and eventually manipulate metal. Each breakthrough created new possibilities, and each possibility created new problems. Over thousands of generations, simple tools became increasingly specialized weapons, and weapons became part of larger systems of technology, society, and power. The first human who picked up a sharp stone probably had no idea what that discovery would eventually become. They could not have imagined bronze swords, iron armies, firearms, missiles, or the technologies of the modern age. They were simply trying to solve a problem with the materials they had. But that is what makes the story so remarkable. Human history was shaped not only by the things we discovered, but by our ability to look at something ordinary and imagine that it could become something more. A stone became a cutting edge, a branch became a spear, a bent piece of wood became a bow, metal became a blade, and an idea became technology. The first weapon was not really a sword, a spear, or a stone. It was the moment a human being looked at the world and thought, there must be a better way. And that idea changed everything.